"You don't belong at this gate, and if you don't step aside right now, I'll make sure you're not flying anywhere today," the gate agent said loudly enough for half the terminal to turn around, her voice cutting through the steady hum of rolling carry-ons and overhead announcements at Gate B12 inside Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport, just after 8:17 a.m. And the words landed harder than the fluorescent lights reflecting off polished tile floors as Danielle Brooks stood still, her posture relaxed, her expression calm, dressed in a charcoal hoodie, dark jeans, and white sneakers that didn't match the polished business travelers lining up for priority boarding. And that was exactly why the agent had singled her out, because Danielle didn't look like first boarding group, didn't look like federal authority, didn't look like someone who spent most of her weeks inspecting aviation safety systems across the country. She simply looked like another quiet traveler holding a passport and a boarding pass, and the agent leaned forward, her badge reading Megan Collins. Eyes narrowed with suspicion as she reached for Danielle's passport without asking, flipping it open with a quick practiced motion, her lips tightening as she scanned the pages like she was searching for something wrong. Anything wrong. And behind Danielle, a businessman in a navy suit shifted his briefcase. A mother with 2 kids paused mid-step, and a college student lifted his phone slightly as the tension began to thicken in the air, because everyone could feel it. The sudden shift from routine boarding to something uncomfortable, something unnecessary, and Danielle didn't argue, didn't protest. She simply watched, calm and observant, like someone who had seen this exact moment unfold before. And Megan exhaled sharply before saying, "This looks suspicious," her tone flat but loud, and Danielle tilted her head slightly, not defensive, just curious, as the overhead speaker announced pre-boarding for families traveling with small children. Yet no one moved, because now all eyes were on the gate desk, and Megan tapped the counter twice before saying, "Step aside," then turning to the scanner and muttering something to another agent nearby. And Danielle remained exactly where she stood, her silence not passive but deliberate, like she was letting the moment unfold on its own, like she was measuring not just the words but the tone, the assumptions, the decision being made in real time. And when Megan looked back, she raised the passport slightly and said, "You people always try to rush the system." And the words hung in the air longer than they should have, and someone behind Danielle whispered, "Did she really just say that?" While Danielle's expression didn't change, her shoulders relaxed, her gaze steady, because she wasn't surprised, she wasn't angry, she was simply watching, letting the room reveal itself, letting the gate, the crowd, and the system speak before she said a single word. And as Megan reached toward a small metal tray beside the desk, the quiet at Gate B12 deepened, not silent, but charged, like something irreversible was about to happen, and no one yet realized how quickly the morning was about to change. Danielle Brooks did not reach for the passport or interrupt the silence, because she had learned long ago that power did not need volume. It needed patience. And the early morning light spilling through the tall glass windows of Terminal B reflected across the polished floor as travelers slowed their steps, pretending to check their phones while listening. While Megan Collins flipped through the passport again with exaggerated care, like she was searching for confirmation of something she had already decided. And Danielle simply folded her hands loosely in front of her, calm and composed, her breathing steady, the kind of stillness that made the tension around her feel louder. And behind her, the businessman in the navy suit cleared his throat softly, shifting his weight as if he wanted to say something but chose not to, while the mother holding a toddler adjusted her grip and whispered to the older child to stay close. Because something about the moment felt off, not dramatic, not chaotic, just quietly uncomfortable, and Megan leaned back slightly and said, "I am going to need you to step aside while we verify this," her tone now formal but still edged with doubt. And Danielle nodded once, not stepping away immediately, just acknowledging the request. And when she finally moved to the side of the counter, her steps were measured and deliberate, like someone accustomed to being observed, someone who understood that every movement in moments like this mattered. And Megan turned toward her coworker, a younger gate agent named Tyler Ramirez, and murmured, "This does not look right," while Tyler glanced quickly at Danielle, then back at the passport, uncertainty flickering across his face. And Danielle noticed that hesitation, the slight shift in posture, the beginning of doubt, and she filed it away silently, because she had spent years reading rooms just like this one, from regional airports in the Midwest to major hubs along the East Coast. And the pattern never changed: suspicion first, confirmation later. And as the boarding line slowed to a halt, a frequent flyer standing near the priority lane lifted his phone slightly, not recording openly, just holding it at chest level, while another traveler leaned toward him and whispered, "What is happening?" And the overhead speaker announced that Group 1 boarding would begin shortly, yet no one moved, because the attention had shifted fully to the small gate desk where Megan now tapped her keyboard with short, deliberate strokes, her brows furrowed as if she expected the screen to validate her instincts. And Danielle remained still, her calm presence almost disarming, her eyes scanning the gate area briefly before returning to Megan. And in that quiet moment, Danielle remembered another terminal years earlier in Chicago, when she had been asked to step aside for additional screening despite holding a verified credential. And she remembered how the delay turned into a conversation, and that conversation turned into a policy review that eventually changed procedures across 3 airports. And that memory did not frustrate her, it grounded her, because she understood something Megan did not yet realize, that moments like this were not interruptions, they were revelations. And as Megan finally looked up again, her tone sharpened slightly. "This may take a few minutes," she said, and Danielle responded with a small nod, her voice calm, and even when she finally spoke, "Take your time." And the simplicity of her response seemed to unsettle Megan more than resistance would have, because Danielle did not argue, did not plead, she simply waited, and the air around Gate B12 tightened further as the morning routine slowed to a quiet standstill, like the entire terminal had paused without realizing that the next few minutes would change more than just one traveler's schedule. The tension at Gate B12 thickened as Megan Collins stared at her screen longer than necessary, her fingers hovering above the keyboard like she expected the system to confirm her suspicions, while Danielle Brooks remained still beside the counter, her calm presence beginning to draw more attention than any raised voice ever could. And Tyler Ramirez shifted uneasily beside Megan before quietly saying, "It scanned earlier without any issue," his voice low but audible enough for the nearby passengers to hear. And Megan glanced sharply at him, her expression tightening before she responded, "Sometimes things slip through." And the businessman in the navy suit behind Danielle let out a slow breath, his eyes moving between the 2 agents as if silently weighing what he was witnessing, while a woman wearing a frequent flyer badge stepped closer, adjusting the strap of her tote bag, her curiosity now fully visible. And the overhead speaker announced a delay for Group 1 boarding due to operational adjustments, causing a ripple of murmurs across the gate area. And Danielle noticed the shift immediately, the way inconvenience always amplified scrutiny, the way waiting made people pay closer attention. And Megan lifted the passport again, flipping through the pages more aggressively now, her tone sharper when she spoke. "I am going to call my supervisor." And Tyler hesitated before nodding, stepping back slightly as Megan reached for the desk phone, pressing a button and speaking into the receiver with clipped professionalism. "I need assistance at Gate B12 for document verification." And the words traveled farther than she intended, causing a few travelers to exchange glances, while Danielle remained composed, her posture unchanged, her silence beginning to feel intentional rather than passive. And a young man in a college sweatshirt leaned toward the frequent flyer and whispered, "This seems unnecessary," while the frequent flyer nodded subtly, her gaze fixed on Danielle. And within moments a supervisor wearing a navy blazer and airport badge approached from the corridor, his name tag reading Robert Henderson, his pace measured but purposeful. And Megan handed him the passport immediately, saying, "Something does not look right." And Robert glanced briefly at Danielle before opening the passport, his brow furrowing slightly as he reviewed the pages. And Danielle met his gaze calmly, her expression neutral but steady. And Robert asked, "Have you already verified the boarding pass?" And Megan responded quickly, "Yes, but I still think we should double-check." And Robert nodded slowly, then looked toward Danielle. "Ma'am, we are just going to confirm a few details." And Danielle replied evenly, "Of course," her voice calm, her tone polite. And that composure seemed to shift the dynamic slightly, because now Robert looked less certain, less aligned with Megan's urgency. And as he turned toward the terminal computer behind the desk, A quiet formed again, heavier this time, because now the moment had moved beyond a single agent and into something larger, and Danielle noticed the subtle change in body language around her. The way passengers leaned in slightly, the way Tyler avoided eye contact, the way Megan crossed her arms defensively. And in that stillness, Danielle recalled another inspection. Years earlier in Phoenix, where a minor document delay had revealed deeper procedural issues, and she understood once again that moments like this revealed more than they interrupted. And as Robert began typing, the terminal seemed to hold its breath, because the situation was no longer just about a passport. It was about judgment, assumptions, and the quiet escalation unfolding in real time. Robert Henderson continued typing while the glow from the terminal screen reflected faintly across his glasses, his expression neutral but increasingly focused as he scrolled through verification prompts. And Megan Collins stood beside him with her arms crossed, her posture rigid, like she was waiting for confirmation of her earlier suspicion, while Danielle Brooks remained quietly composed a few feet away, her presence steady, her eyes calmly observing every shift in tone and movement around the gate. And behind her the frequent flyer stepped slightly closer, her voice low but firm as she addressed Tyler Ramirez. "I saw her earlier at security. Everything looked fine." And Tyler hesitated before responding softly. "Yes, it did." His admission subtle but enough to change the atmosphere, because now another voice had entered the moment, another perspective that challenged the narrative forming around Danielle. And the college student holding his phone lowered it slightly, whispering to the businessman, "This seems like too much." While the businessman nodded slowly, his gaze fixed on the desk, and Megan glanced back toward the growing cluster of observers, her tone tightening as she spoke again. "We are just following protocol." But the words sounded less certain now, less authoritative, and Robert paused mid-typing before asking Tyler, "Did the passport scan earlier without flags?" And Tyler nodded. "Yes, sir." It cleared, and Robert leaned back slightly, considering the response, his eyes moving briefly toward Danielle. And in that moment, a woman wearing a flight attendant uniform walking past the gate slowed her steps, noticing the delay and the gathered crowd. And she asked quietly, "Is everything all right here?" And Megan responded quickly, "Just a document verification." But the flight attendant glanced at Danielle, her expression thoughtful, like she recognized the calm confidence that did not match the tension surrounding her. And Danielle remained still, her posture relaxed, her hands resting loosely at her sides. And the stillness seemed to unsettle Megan further, because Danielle was not defensive, not impatient. She was simply waiting, and that quiet patience began to influence the room, shifting attention from suspicion to curiosity. And Robert resumed typing, his fingers slower now, more deliberate, as if he was re-evaluating assumptions, while the overhead speaker announced another brief boarding delay, and the murmurs grew slightly louder, and the frequent flyer stepped forward again, her tone polite but clear. "Is there anything she needs to do?" And Robert responded, "We are just confirming details." But his voice had softened, less aligned with Megan's earlier certainty, and Danielle noticed the shift immediately, the subtle change in authority, the way Robert now seemed cautious rather than convinced. And she remembered another inspection years earlier in Atlanta when a simple verification revealed training gaps among staff, and she recognized the familiar pattern unfolding again. And as Robert finally paused, his eyes narrowing at the screen, the tension returned, heavier now, because something in the verification process had caught his attention. And Megan leaned closer, her voice low but urgent. "What does it say?" And Robert did not answer immediately, instead glancing once more at Danielle, and the silence that followed felt deliberate, like the moment before a realization begins to take shape. And around Gate B12 the travelers who had gathered now waited quietly, sensing that whatever happened next would shift the entire tone of the morning. Robert Henderson's eyes stayed fixed on the screen longer than before, his fingers no longer moving as the silence stretched across Gate B12, and Megan Collins leaned closer, her voice tightening as she repeated, "What does it say?" But Robert did not answer immediately, instead exhaling slowly like he was weighing something carefully. And Danielle Brooks noticed the shift in his posture, the slight hesitation that replaced his earlier neutrality, and she remained calm, her expression steady, her presence grounded in quiet confidence. while behind her the frequent flyer exchanged a glance with the businessman in the Navy suit, both sensing that the moment had crossed into something more serious than routine verification, and Tyler Ramirez shifted his stance again, his discomfort now visible as he looked between Megan and Robert, waiting for direction, and finally Robert spoke, his tone measured. The system shows prior federal clearance tags, and Megan frowned immediately, her brow tightening as she responded. That does not mean anything. We still need to verify manually. And Robert nodded slightly, but his hesitation lingered, and Danielle watched the exchange without interrupting, her calm silence now carrying more weight than any argument could, and the flight attendant who had paused earlier stepped a little closer, her voice quiet but curious. Federal clearance, she repeated softly, and Megan responded quickly. It happens sometimes, but the explanation sounded thinner than before, less confident, and Danielle felt the subtle shift ripple through the small crowd, curiosity replacing suspicion, and in that moment Megan reached for the passport again, flipping it open with renewed determination, her voice sharper as she said, "We cannot allow boarding until this is resolved." And she stepped toward the side counter where a small metal container used for document checks sat beside the scanner, her movements quick and deliberate, as if she wanted to regain control of the situation. And Tyler looked at her uncertainly. "Maybe we should wait," he said quietly, but Megan shook her head, her tone firm. "We follow procedure." And Danielle's gaze followed the movement calmly, her composure unchanged, while the overhead announcement repeated the delay, and more travelers turned their attention toward the desk, sensing the escalation. And Danielle remembered a training review years earlier in Denver where a similar moment revealed procedural misunderstandings. And she understood once again that the real story was not the document itself, but the decisions unfolding around it. And Robert shifted beside Megan, his voice quieter now. "Let us slow down." But Megan continued, her focus fixed on the passport, determined to assert authority, and the frequent flyer stepped forward slightly, her voice polite but firm. "Is that necessary?" And Megan replied, "Yes, ma'am. We are ensuring compliance." And Danielle remained still, her calm presence anchoring the tension, her silence allowing the moment to unfold naturally. And the quiet at Gate B12 deepened again, heavier now, as the small group of travelers watched, sensing that the situation had reached a turning point where assumptions, authority, and judgment were about to collide in a way none of them expected. Danielle Brooks watched Megan Collins move toward the side counter with quiet precision, her eyes steady, her posture unchanged, while Robert Henderson shifted uneasily beside her, his voice low but cautious as he repeated, "Let us slow down." Yet Megan continued, her focus fixed on the passport in her hand, determined to assert control over a moment that was already slipping beyond her expectations. And Tyler Ramirez stepped half a pace forward, his hesitation clear as he said, "Maybe we should verify through central support first." But Megan shook her head again, her tone firm. "We are following procedure." And the frequent flyer standing nearby exchanged another glance with the businessman in the Navy suit, both sensing that the atmosphere had shifted from routine to something far more consequential, and Danielle remained calm, her gaze following every movement, her silence deliberate. And in that stillness, she reached slowly into the pocket of her hoodie, pulling out her phone with an unhurried motion that drew subtle attention without demanding it. And Megan glanced briefly toward her before returning her focus to the counter, and Danielle unlocked her phone calmly, scrolling once before lifting it to her ear, her voice soft and composed when she spoke. "This is Danielle Brooks." She paused briefly, listening, then continued. "Yes, I am at Gate B12 in Terminal B at Dallas-Fort Worth." Her tone remained even, her words measured, and Tyler noticed the shift. Immediately, his eyes moving from Danielle to Robert, sensing that something had changed, while Megan continued adjusting items at the counter, unaware of the quiet shift taking place behind her, and Danielle spoke again, her voice calm but precise. "I need you to log an observation." She listened for a moment, then added, "Yes, document verification escalation." And the frequent flyer leaned slightly closer, not intrusive, just curious, while the college student lowered his phone again, sensing the subtle gravity in Danielle's tone. And Robert glanced toward Danielle, his expression tightening slightly as he processed the conversation, and Danielle continued, Please notify regional oversight. Her words steady, not raised, yet carrying quiet authority, and the overhead announcement echoed again, reminding passengers of the delay, but now the murmurs had softened, replaced by attentive silence. Because Danielle's calm composure had shifted the entire energy of the gate, and Megan finally turned back, her eyes narrowing slightly as she noticed Danielle on the phone. Her tone edged with impatience when she said, "Ma'am, we are still verifying." And Danielle nodded once, covering the phone briefly as she replied politely, "Take your time." Then returned to the call. "Yes, I will remain here." She paused, listening, then added softly, "No, there is no urgency, just documentation." And Robert's posture stiffened slightly, because now the calmness in Danielle's voice felt deliberate, purposeful, like someone accustomed to structured reporting rather than casual complaint. And Tyler shifted again, his uncertainty growing, and the quiet at Gate B12 deepened, as the moment transitioned from suspicion to something far more controlled, far more measured, and Danielle ended the call calmly, lowering her phone without explanation, her expression unchanged, her presence steady, while Megan resumed her movements at the counter, still unaware that the balance of control had begun to shift, and around them the gathered travelers sensed it too, the quiet turning point that had just occurred without raised voices, without confrontation, only calm authority settling into the air. The quiet at Gate B12 lingered after Danielle Brooks lowered her phone, and the stillness felt different now, heavier, more deliberate, as if the entire terminal had shifted without anyone fully understanding why. And Megan Collins continued adjusting items on the side counter, her movements precise but slightly rushed, while Robert Henderson watched Danielle more carefully than before, his posture no longer neutral but cautious, and Tyler Ramirez remained still beside the desk, his uncertainty visible as he glanced between Megan and Danielle, sensing that the balance in the moment had begun to change. And the frequent flyer folded her arms loosely, her curiosity now unmistakable, while the businessman in the navy suit leaned subtly forward, his attention fixed on Danielle. And Megan finally turned back toward the desk, holding the passport again, her tone firm but slightly strained as she said, "We are still reviewing." And Danielle nodded calmly, her voice even when she responded, "Of course," and that calmness seemed to ripple outward, quieting the murmurs that had begun to grow. And Robert cleared his throat softly, his voice measured as he asked Megan, "Have we contacted Central Verification?" And Megan hesitated briefly before replying, "Not yet." And Robert nodded slowly, then looked toward Danielle, his expression thoughtful, and Danielle met his gaze calmly, her composure unchanged. And in that moment, the overhead speaker announced another delay, causing several travelers to glance at their watches, but no one moved away, because the attention at Gate B12 had deepened into something more compelling than routine boarding. And then Danielle spoke, her tone calm but clear, "You may want to contact your operations manager." And Megan's expression tightened slightly, her voice defensive as she replied, "We are handling this." And Danielle inclined her head slightly, not arguing, simply acknowledging the response, and Robert's eyes moved between them, the tension growing more subtle but more significant. And Tyler shifted again, his voice quiet as he said, "Supervisor, should we escalate?" And Robert paused, then nodded slowly, reaching toward the desk phone, and Megan watched him, her posture stiffening, while Danielle remained still, her calm presence anchoring the moment. And as Robert dialed, his tone professional but cautious, "This is Gate B12. We need operational support for document verification." And the words carried across the small crowd, drawing even more attention. And the flight attendant who had paused earlier returned, standing a few steps away, her expression thoughtful, and Danielle's gaze remained steady, her silence deliberate. And after a brief pause, Robert ended the call, his posture more formal now, and Megan glanced at him, her voice quieter. "What did they say?" And Robert responded, "Someone is coming." And the quiet that followed felt different again, like a turning point had just been acknowledged. And Danielle breathed evenly, her composure unchanged, while the travelers around them sensed the shift, the subtle realization that the moment had moved beyond suspicion into something far more consequential. And Megan adjusted her badge unconsciously, her earlier certainty fading, and Tyler looked toward Danielle again, his uncertainty replaced by cautious respect, and as the seconds passed, the tension at Gate B12 settled into a calm that felt less like waiting and more like the quiet before a truth begins to surface. The quiet at Gate B12 deepened as footsteps approached from the corridor behind the gate desk, and Robert Henderson straightened slightly, his posture becoming more formal as a tall woman in a Navy operations blazer walked toward them with measured confidence, her airport badge identifying her as Linda Carver, Regional Operations Manager, and the subtle shift in authority was immediate. Because Megan Collins uncrossed her arms and adjusted her stance while Tyler Ramirez stepped back slightly, and Linda slowed as she reached the desk, her eyes scanning the small crowd before settling on Robert, her voice calm but direct as she asked, "What seems to be the issue?" And Robert handed her the passport carefully, his tone measured, "Document verification with federal clearance flags." And Linda glanced briefly at Danielle Brooks before opening the passport, her expression neutral but attentive, and Danielle met her gaze calmly, her composure unchanged, while the frequent flyer and businessman watched quietly, sensing that the moment had reached another turning point, and Linda flipped through the pages slowly, her eyes narrowing slightly as she reviewed the identification details. Then she looked toward Megan. "Has Central Verification been contacted?" And Megan hesitated before answering. "We requested support," and Linda nodded once, then turned slightly toward Danielle, her tone professional. "Ma'am, thank you for your patience," and Danielle responded calmly, "Of course," her voice steady, and the quiet around the gate tightened further as Linda stepped toward the terminal computer, entering information with practiced efficiency, her fingers moving quickly while Megan watched, her earlier confidence fading into cautious silence, and Tyler shifted again, his attention fixed on Linda's expression as she reviewed the results. And the overhead announcement repeated the delay, but no one moved, because the attention at Gate B12 had narrowed completely to the desk, and after a moment Linda paused, her posture straightening slightly, her eyes returning to the passport, and she looked toward Robert with a subtle shift in tone. "This is marked for internal oversight routing," and Robert nodded slowly, his caution deepening, while Megan glanced between them, her uncertainty growing, and Danielle remained still, her calm presence anchoring the moment. And Linda closed the passport gently before turning toward Danielle again, her voice respectful. "Ma'am, may I confirm your full name?" And Danielle replied evenly, "Danielle Brooks," and Linda nodded once, her expression sharpening slightly. Then she looked toward Robert again, her tone quieter now. "We should pause all actions until verification completes," and Robert agreed immediately, nodding, while Megan shifted her weight, her earlier urgency replaced by hesitation, and the travelers nearby sensed the shift, the quiet transition from suspicion to caution, and as Linda stepped slightly aside, speaking quietly into her radio, the tension at Gate B12 transformed once more, not chaotic, not loud, but controlled, deliberate, and Danielle stood calmly. In the center of it all, her presence steady, her silence carrying authority that had not yet been spoken, while the gathered passengers sensed that whatever happened next would redefine everything that had just unfolded. Linda Carver lowered her radio slowly, her expression composed but noticeably more serious than before, and the subtle shift did not go unnoticed by Robert Henderson or Tyler Ramirez, both of whom straightened slightly as the atmosphere at Gate B12 tightened once again, and Megan Collins remained still beside the counter, her earlier confidence replaced by quiet uncertainty as Linda stepped closer to Danielle Brooks, her tone respectful but measured when she spoke. "Ma'am, we have contacted oversight for verification," and Danielle nodded calmly, her voice even as she replied, "Thank you." And the silence that followed felt deliberate, the kind that settles when everyone senses that the moment is nearing its conclusion, and within seconds Linda's radio crackled softly, her eyes narrowing slightly as she listened, her posture becoming more formal with each passing word, and Robert watched her carefully, his caution deepening, while Tyler shifted his weight, his attention fixed entirely on Linda's reaction, and after a brief pause Linda responded quietly into the radio, "Confirmed," and the words seemed to settle over the gate like a quiet wave, and Linda turned toward Danielle, her expression now unmistakably respectful, her voice clear but calm as she said, "Ma'am, thank you for your patience." And she handed the passport back with deliberate care. And Megan's posture stiffened slightly as she processed the shift, her gaze moving from Linda to Danielle, and Robert exhaled slowly, the tension in his shoulders easing, while the travelers nearby exchanged subtle glances, sensing that something significant had just occurred. And Linda then addressed the gate staff, her tone professional but firm. "We will resume normal boarding." And Tyler nodded quickly, stepping back toward the scanner, while Megan remained still for a brief moment before adjusting her badge, her expression quieter now. And Danielle accepted the passport calmly, her composure unchanged. And she spoke softly, her voice steady. "I appreciate your professionalism." And Linda nodded respectfully, while Robert gave a small acknowledging nod, and the frequent flyer smiled faintly, sensing the shift from suspicion to recognition, and the businessman in the navy suit relaxed his grip on his briefcase, the tension dissolving around him. And as the overhead speaker announced boarding would resume, passengers began to move again, the flow of travel returning to normal. But the energy at Gate B12 felt different now, quieter, more reflective, and Danielle stepped forward toward the scanner, her calm presence unchanged. And as she handed her boarding pass to Tyler, he nodded respectfully, his voice softer than before as he said, "Have a good flight." And Danielle returned the nod gently, stepping forward with quiet confidence. And before she moved down the jet bridge, she paused briefly, her voice calm and measured as she addressed the group softly. Moments like this shaped the standard, and the words lingered in the air, not loud, not dramatic, but steady. And as Danielle walked down the jet bridge, the gate returned to its normal rhythm, yet the quiet lesson remained, carried in the calm authority she never raised, only revealed.